some direction over here. So good morning, everybody. I'm Bruce Warner. I'm the new president of the Trimet board. This is our March 14th board briefing, so I will call this meeting to order and get right into the agenda. I understand Commissioner Clark, or excuse me, Director Clark, will be late, and I know Commissioner Director Prosser is in the building. Will be back here shortly. So,
right.
Do you want to get started with your update?
I'll do just a very few quick updates. First of all, ridership for February, which was up 7.9% overall. Now, as some people will say, weekday actually added a day to the month, but nonetheless it was still up better than that. So it's really good news for us. 8.2 million trips taken on buses, mass and west. Overall, bus ridership has increased for 7 consecutive months now, so that bus ridership is up 4.9% in February. West ridership continued double-digit growth, up 14.7% in February of last year. And the Max Green Line was up 10.5%, and that's up to a total now of about 26,400 daily riders, which is a very strong number, and really right one of the conditions for that new service. Obviously, we'll keep an eye on ridership. Rising gas prices always has an effect on us as well, so that will be one of the challenges I think we'll be facing as we enter the summer. Wanted to give you some quick updates on the Portland-Milwaukee light rail project. During the last month, we've actually added 75 new construction workers to the job. To date, the project has created about 1,200 direct jobs. There's a wonderful website that the staff has put together to transport the geographic location and the numbers of those hires, and so that's available on our website. Related to the bridge, crews are now assembling the platform to begin construction of the east tower. You might recall we completed the foundation, the footings, if you will, for the west tower. On the west tower, the next step will be actually pouring what they call the pile cap. That is a concrete structure that combines all the separate footings together, and that will actually occur, expected to occur next week. Again, we're continuing to drill some of the foundations for the structure of the part that hits the ground on the west side, and then in the future on the east side, and also some of the upper structure footings are underway, stretching from South Florida into the downtown area. So lots of activities. You also may have noticed that some activity here along 17th Street. Those of the early acquisitions have been removed to make room for the widened street and light rail. But also some utility work beginning to, in anticipation of the light rail approaching. So we appreciate everybody's patience. Construction is always a little messy, but some of us think it's fun, actually. Those of us. And with Olivia, I just wanted to note that Olivia once again organized a regional trip of elected officials, the JPAC, Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation, Metro Group, visiting officials in Washington, D.C. last week, and I was privileged to be part of that. As a sort of separate visit, we actually visited with officials at the U.S. DOT, and that was also, I think, a very forthcoming visit. And to some extent was an introduction to the new world where there are a lot of competitive grants that the DOT is offering in substitution for what used to be the federal funding issues of earmarks, asking particular members of Congress to support projects and to insert the earmark into the bill. That doesn't happen anymore, but there is more discretion now on the part of the DOT to actually award grants for certain programs, one of which this region's been pretty successful in, which is Tiger programs, and we've actually, Moody Street was one of the results of that project, and some additional funding from Selwood Bridge recently. So again, learning a bit more about what the administration is looking for from those discretionary grant programs, I think was a very important part of that visit. Here at home, at the same time, our short legislative session drew to a close, so I was hoping Olivia could provide us a little update on how it affected Trimet.
Sure, just really, really briefly. It was a 35-day, the new annual session, the 35-day short session, not supposed to be controversial. 300 bills were submitted. Most of those didn't go anywhere. If the conversation is really dominated by the governor and the governor's policy imperatives on health care and education and obviously the budget. For Trimet, it's really an opportunity for us to educate folks on our budget, on service changes, our labor issues, that sort of thing. But we also fixed an inadvertent error that the legislature had made in the last legislative session that changed the configuration of the court fines and basically took away the revenue that we were receiving. And it's not a lot. I think in 2011 it was about $180,000. But it was still significant. And I think inadvertent because that's not what they had intended to do. So in a technical corrections bill, they fixed that, and we're back in business. I think we're expecting to receive something around the same amount of money this coming year. And in short, I think that's kind of sums it up. I think they're going to have to rethink how they conduct this 35-day session because there was a lot more bills, and they could actually handle a lot more issues that people wanted on the table, and just not enough time. So I would say back to the DC issue. While we were there last week, the Congress is actually acting or trying to act on federal transportation policy. And as we are sitting here right now, I believe the Senate is about to vote on their reauthorization bill, which they call MAP 21, to reauthorize federal transportation policy. And then it comes up to the House, and then it has 2 weeks until the old bill actually sunsets, March 31st. And if they can't agree, the Senate and the House can't agree on a 2-year, the Senate bill is a 2-year bill, then they'll probably just extend current law, I would expect, until they can come up with some compromise. But it was very exciting. It was happening while we were there, and it's happening right now.
So, questions for them? Yeah.
I guess I would just extend my congratulations on getting that bill changed, quietly done. That's a big thing for us, and we need that for our fair enforcement. So that's really good. I guess the questions for both of you was, what was the kind of the mood back in DC in terms of transportation and general feelings?
Well, cautiously optimistic and frustrating.
Yeah, I would say that. Particularly our delegation, we're optimistic about the Senate bill, which is, from our standpoint, and I think is generally a progressive, good bill. And it preserved the bipartisan nature of transportation funding, which is what has been sort of the historical nature of our business, which is it really hasn't been a partisan issue. And so we saw that in the Senate. But then we also saw, these amendments dealing with contraception issues and other things that came up, and there was just enormous frustration by the staff of our senators, that in particular, that they were having to deal with those sorts of things at the same time that they were dealing with the transportation bill. And I would say but that said, they have reached the agreement to create a fixed set of amendments and debate those, and they were really pleased that they had gotten that point to that point. And that has led to, I think, where we are right now, where we're kind of on the verge of a Senate bill, which is a very positive step. Even if it doesn't make it all the way through, it's a positive step because it becomes so the groundwork for moving ahead in the future.
We also had a representative of the ENO Foundation come and speak to us, which is a transportation foundation. And it was interesting to get their perspective on the future of transportation policy at the federal level. And the big, asking the question, where's the big vision? What's the next big thing in transportation? They're not really feeling that we're likely there yet. And also, how do we put more performance measures on the dollars that are coming from the federal government to the states? So lots of interesting conversations around that.
I guess the only other thing I would say is back to the jobs. Dr. Beth asked a question last time. I was glad to see the email interchanges with Mr. Blocker about the utilization of women and people of color in the workforce. So I'm hoping we can get that kind of put together as a regular report, that gives us, tracks our work that we can actually talk about, and I think hopefully brag about in terms of what we're doing out there.
Yeah. I think the results so far are really excellent. Looking forward to that part of this meeting.
All right, good. Welcome.
Perhaps if I just sort of continue, this is a little bit of a segue to the next item, but I did want to just note that the Budget Task Force completed its work last formal meeting. They're going to have one sort of celebratory lunch, but formal meeting last night. And again, the focus of this second round of their deliberations are really long-term budget issues that Trimet faces and suggestions for reform. So as they complete the report, no doing the email interchanges to do that over the next couple of months, we'll obviously invite Cynthia and other members of that task force back to the board to provide you the recommendations at that point in time directly. But I think there will be a lot of fuel for thought and potential action in the future that comes out of that report. Again, my great thanks to that. It's been a terrific group, as Board Member Prosser will attest to, and very deeply embedded in the budget issues that we face. And it's great, first of all, to have another group of advocates in addition to the board who understand the problems we're facing and are active in their communities. So that is very helpful. Just to note that.
Good. So we're ready to move on then to the
I think
next
we are.
agenda? Is there anything questions you have of the Colonel Manager on this one? Okay. So why don't we move on, and Drew Blevins, you're going to give us an update on public response, talking about fare and service proposals.
Thank you.
You bet.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My role at Trimet is to serve as the Director of Marketing and Customer Service. And to give you a quick update on the public outreach process with regard to our budget challenges and choices, I would just start by clarifying that our intent with regard to the process is to ensure that we're providing opportunities for engagement and access, and to demonstrate transparency so that we can be as inclusive as possible by giving as many people a voice in this process as possible toward an outcome that will be the best of this challenged environment we're in. I have a handout that is included in your packet, and it's two-sided. And what I'd like to refer to first is the side that starts with a tab at the top that's highlighted. This says options and ideas in blue type with a white background. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. What I want to start with is just to share with you that the agency, the top really is just a set of tabs that are there to indicate and remind us of what the process looks like. And this is a process that started back at the end of October when the agency put out a press release to announce that we had a $12 to $17 million budget chasm that we were anticipating for fiscal year 13. Subsequent to that, the agency departments huddled and identified a set of elements that might be considered as a list of ideas that could allow us to get to that $17 million chasm. And so we posted online an interactive survey on December 14th to allow the public an opportunity to weigh in on which of those elements might be palatable by way of just a simple yes or no across a dozen elements. And for those of you who took the survey, you know that it was represented by way of a graphical device or a bar that showed when you got to 17 million. This survey required that you answer every one of the questions, and so as you can see on this page, all of the universe is 4,801 respondents, and they all responded to each of the items listed here. This process created the opportunity for us to inform the second phase of the public outreach process. And let me just quickly note that with regard to this options and ideas phase, the first phase, this is the first time we've done this. In the past, we've started out with open houses. This time we thought we'd like to create for the public an opportunity to understand what the issues are, what the drivers were that got us to this point. So we've put that into the online content. And then again, we provided some background on the rationale for the ideas we had listed. We also plugged in some Q&A so we could help inform the public with regard to what we were facing and why, so they can understand the kind of challenges that it would take to arrive at that $17 million. So when you look at this first page, you'll note that things like increased fare, sell ads on our website, those are examples of items that we plugged into the initial proposal, which I'll share with you on the back page, because they were overwhelmingly in favor of moving forward on these things. With regard to the second item under revenue, which was to eliminate transfers and round trips on a single fare, when we actually moved to the second phase, the initial proposal, we took out the eliminate transfers. We took out that part of that because people were overwhelmingly opposed to not allowing people to make transfers on a 2-hour trip, even if it were one way. And so, if we can flip to the second page, kind of share with you what we learned by way of the items on the left that we plugged into our actual proposal. Let me just start by saying that at the bottom of this page, you'll see that we, subsequent to the board meeting on February 8th, we posted our proposal online. And then we went out and had a series of 4 open houses around the region and several community meetings. So you can see at the bottom here in the highlighted box that we had just over 3,000 folks respond to this proposal. And you can see by way of the various channels kind of how that was distributed, with a lion's share coming from the online content. In this phase, rather than a survey, we indicated what we were proposing as discrete elements, and we created for the public an opportunity to give us their feedback by way of a, if you will, tabula rasa, just a blank slate comment card where they could tell us what was important to them. Because we really wanted to understand what the challenges were specifically for our riders and the general public. So those 3,000 respondents actually provided, as you can see above, nearly 8,500 comments. So just short of 3 comments per person. And just so you know, the comments were all the way from very discreet, don't change the line 16 because of the impact on how I ride, to just general comments like don't increase fares at all, don't decrease service at all. To, on the other hand, some comments that said, we agree with everything, thank you. So we coded all those, and so all of this we should take with a grain of salt in that it's not perfect. For example, under the increased fares proposal, we had 270 postcards from one company in particular, where they copied the postcards and they had individuals sign them. And the postcard essentially said, don't increase fares and don't change service on the line 16 and 17. So those numbers, grew substantially as a result of that. But it was important that we incorporated those because it was part of the public process, and we wanted to understand the impact on folks. So as you go through this, you'll see that on the colored bar chart you see here, it really tells us 2 things. One is it tells us which of these items was most important to people. For example, the reaction to reconfigure bus routes, as you can see, translated to a significant number of people who responded, versus, for example, sell ads on the Trimet website. In the case of the comments to sell ads on the Trimet website, it was overwhelmingly positive, with people in favor of doing that to generate revenue. Yet the numbers were fairly small in terms of the people that cared, if you will, versus the number of people that cared with regard to reconfiguring bus routes. And I would point out that with that, one of the things that tells us is that people responded fairly actively to those things that affected them personally. And that was important for us to see. In the middle of the page, just for some additional information, we called out the numbers on the bus lines with regard to the proposal to reconfigure bus routes based on segments that had low ridership and redundancies. And you can see the comments at the top here. We prioritize these in terms of the numbers of opposed in a ranked order, and I cut it off at 5. The numbers start to they drop precipitously beyond that to some very small numbers. But when Neil shares with you the updated refined proposal, then you'll be able to compare and contrast what we've done relative to this feedback. So you can see how this informed the third phase, which will begin today in terms of the public process with refinements based on this information. And the third phase, just as an aside, will include, again, posting the refined proposal on the website today, subsequent to the board meeting, and it will include a series of 5 public hearings around the region between Pam, help me here, I think the 12th and the 19th of March.
19th to 27th, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You got it.
And so we will, again, track all of the public comments between now and April 6th. We will code those. We will also keep all of the verbatims, which we've done to this point, and those have particularly helped service planning in terms of their recommendations for the refined proposal. And finally, just again, on the right side of this page, we've listed all of the other comments that we've received from folks with regard to ideas that the public has that Trimet might consider. And while those weren't part of the specific set of proposal elements, we wanted to make sure we captured that additional feedback to understand the temperature out there and engage some of the challenges. So any questions that folks might have?
So the other comments are a combination of this material as well as the public comments we received at the open house.
Yeah, in fact, all of these comments are representative of all of those channels. So you see at the bottom, Steve, in this highlighted box, the comments are derived from these different channels.
So so I attended 2 of the open houses. One of them was quite robust in participation, aggression.
Yes.
35 people,
Right.
maybe more. How can we imagine stimulating that participation? And is it? I suspect it occurs when someone is seeing something that they don't like and they'll come out, versus if they support something, they're generally not inclined to come out and show their support, generally speaking.
Yes.
So we don't want to create a firefight by having a negative to stimulate participation, say in Gresham and Beaverton, or down at Portland or North Portland. But are there ways that we can stimulate attendance?
Yeah, you know, in the 10 years that I've been here, if we have 10 people at an open house, we're jumping up and down that we've been successful. I think the most people we had attend an open house might have been 100 folks a few years back when we were talking about eliminating free rail zone, and we had a lot of folks downtown who participated. And that sort of supports your point that when there's bad news, people want to come out and respond to it. What I find interesting, just by the way, about this is that anybody would all the S's or support we have for these things is quite remarkable in my mind. When typically people come out to say, don't do that, because that's going to have a negative effect on me. With regard to open houses, one of the reasons why we went to the virtual content is so that we could get to those people who wouldn't be inclined to want to, actually physically get to an open house. And so we prompted that by way of a number of emails and phone calls to influencers, stakeholders, community groups, business groups, so we could encourage those folks to let their constituents, staff and employees know that we have these things going on, to encourage participation. And I think, Steve, we'll continue to look for those kinds of ways. We're quite encouraged by way of the online response. Frankly, it takes it, tenfold beyond, even more than that, beyond anything we've experienced in the past. So we think we're onto something here, and I think we just need to refine it. The open houses, we also have considered that, for example, if we could piggyback on some other community events, we might have more success. For example, we met with ERCO as part of the process when we had the open houses, and Janelle actually coordinated that, and we had about 80 people turn out for that, and we had piggybacked on another event they were having. And so, and Neil, of course, presented at that event. I think that was an example of an opportunity where we could get leverage from other things going on in that community.
So if we have approximately 6, I think, if we could attempt to localize some of the recommendations in addition to the messaging around max headways, fares, but also provide some upfront information, whether it's a web communications, any radio or whatever else we might do, community organizations, so that folks in the communities in which we're having the public hearings could have some sense of locale. A sense of place sometimes stimulates participation.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And in fact, just quickly, we did some of that. I think there's an opportunity to do much more. In the email correspondence that we sent to different community interests, we tried to highlight those challenges or changes, potential changes that would affect those particular constituents in their local area. But we could do more of that, I think.
Yeah, I was just noticing that open house, the number of attendees and community meetings, they're fairly close.
Yeah.
And was this the first year that we've done actual community meetings versus open houses?
It's the first year that we were proactive in identifying groups that we wanted to meet with. For example, in the survey that we did, for those of you who took it, you might recall we also asked for demographic information, because we wanted to understand who was responding and whether or not that represented the community. We learned from the responses that it didn't adequately represent the community. And so ERCO was an example of an open or a community meeting that, again, Janelle developed for us so that we could reach out and get to the voices in that community. So we could have a better representation of the kind of feedback. And I think we'll do more of that, but this was really the first year that we were proactive about it, based on the survey informing us of what the inadequacies were.
Great. No, I think it's really good, and it's just interesting to me that those two things are very close in terms of number.
Yeah, and you know, and I think that, again, speaks to the fact that the community meetings really, the intent of participating at those meetings was to be a part of other things that were going on in the community, and it made it more relevant, perhaps, than just a general open house. You know, tongue-in-cheek, I've often said that if we were to really make open houses work, we need to get to something like an extreme sports event where you have lots of people, and we just sort of snuck in there and talked about transit. But I think community meetings are the next best thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, especially with the discussions around transit equity,
Yes.
those discussions I think is really important. And I think having a first one is pretty, it's impressive just in that we've had open houses, I guess, traditionally, and the numbers are very close.
Yes.
So I think that's important.
Well, thank you.
I would just add to that while we are in this 21st century and everybody assumes, assumes that riders and general public all have the technology at their disposal. That is far from the truth. So while we're discovering that online has generated a lot, don't forget that you must put double the effort into certain communities to get the voice of people and seek ways in which we can bring people and have their voices. If the ERCO meeting brought you 80 people, that's almost a fourth of what you did total. That says something. That the way the communities are going to communicate and give their voices have to be, number one, in a setting where they do not feel threatened, and a setting where they feel comfortable enough to speak, and one where they can get the information so they can digest it and then respond. So just wanted to reiterate that we don't want to, in going forward, do that. Secondly, I am glad that we're going to do a community meeting, whatever, in a couple of weeks over in Northeast Portland. But in the beginning, when we start doing these meetings, we need to make sure that we're hitting each one of the areas each time, so that the communities do not feel like they've been left out, and you come to me later. Now, traditionally for Northeast Portland, everything that normally happens over there, we are given and say, now get on the page with us. And since I have to represent that district, and I do it so gladly and proudly, we are tired of being brought and say, get, we want to be on this side before something is developed.
Thank you. That's great feedback. And in fact, what I take away from that is the idea that we need to go to the community as opposed to have them come to us. And I think that's the key that we'll take away.
The other thought I had, I think Portland Saturday Market just started up. We're getting into the season of farmers markets. It might be interesting to explore the possibility of renting a booth at various of those and having a Trimet presence there and grab people as they walk by, just engage them in conversation and get feedback.
I just want to say, Drew, I did do the online survey. I compliment you and your team. It was just really user-friendly and I think enhances the process. And I hear Dr. Bethel, I think that can't be the only thing. And obviously outreach is important. I don't know how many years ago, 3 years ago in Multnomah County, it was downtown, one of the public meetings, and it was just what Dr. Bethel is describing. It was more, this is what we're doing, but we'll listen to everybody. So even at these public meetings, there's a way that we can, I know in my case, for example, Multnomah County, there were a considerable amount of people. I was there well over 2 hours of listening to people. So, but if there's a way we can engage without just, here's your 3 minutes, and I don't know what that is, but I would agree if there's a way we can be communicating, really having people feel like they've been heard. We need to do that a little bit better than we have in the past. But this is a great start, and I mostly just wanted to compliment you on that. Thanks.
Good. Mr. President, I just might note, and again, to compliment Drew and his staff and others, one of the reasons I think that this process is beginning to open some of these doors that we haven't in the past is we also give it more time. And I think that's been really important to that whole conversation. Any communicating conversation takes some time to do the logistics, to sit in, to get on people's agendas, to work with other groups like Orco and others to make sure that we coordinate with them. And so, again, I think the other part of this is that as we come down the funnel to the actual specific recommendations, we do get a little bit more from just what do you think. And the first question was fares versus service primarily, and ideas about each of those, details about each of those categories. The next round was, well, here's a specific proposal to respond to. We got feedback on that. And now we'll transition to a much more specific proposal that really is aimed at so each level of review gets more narrowly focused and tailored in terms of the actual comments that we need to receive from the public. So again, I think part of that, I think that's been a good process. I think it's one that we may want to repeat in the future, but it's also one that takes a lot of time and really needs to for us. So just a comment on that and how we might want to begin to rethink a little bit more on that. So we're budget timelines in the future.
I guess I just had a question on the number of folks that participated or postcards on the 16, 17. I think we had some testimony, was it from Greenbrier last meeting that indicated, so was this the same, or I see Mr. Harvey in the audience, so I wondered if other firms were also involved in this, or was it Greenbrier?
In that particular instance, it was employees of Gunderson.
Okay.
We've also received a letter, of course, from Mr. Harvey in the waterfront group. So we've had considerable feedback on the 16 and 17, which we'll address in the refined proposal.
And where is line 22?
Thank you.
Mark Road. Okay, thank you. Here we are, there's one. Okay, thank you. All right, good.
Some additional thoughts. So part of this is gathering what folks feel to inform our decision making. Other part of this is informing the community about what we've heard and how their contributions are actually being listened to, taking decisions about this budget, but actually, we may be in the same boat a long time. So as we inform ourselves, and I think we need to inform the community so that engagement process continues, because it's ultimately, as I think we all recognize, it's going to be a community decision, not only how to balance this budget this year, but how we structure Trimet in the future. So it's an ongoing process that Drew is very capable of carrying out. I think we need to engage in that by attending the public hearings, listen to the context, and then inform us that, as Dr. Bethel and others have said, we represent communities.
And I believe we are all set to go to the various public meetings next week for the most part, right?
Yes, I
So
know
thanks
board
to the
members
board.
have sort of divvied up
Yeah.
in self-selected mode various assignments soon, so yeah.
Good.
And I will be at everyone. I'll be late to a couple, but I'll be at everyone as well.
Did you have something? I'm sorry.
I do, just very quickly, so I can have clarity. This initial survey was done on the options and ideas, and it was more broad in its presentation because this is what we're thinking about. Let's get your input and ideas and thoughts and concerns. And then as we move to the initial proposal, people have more of an opportunity to take a look at specific options that we're looking at, either cutting, increasing, or adjusting. So as we begin to make decisions and feel confident that the information that as I look at this information, there are some things that, as you get more specific, you'll find more opposition, of course, because then you're talking about my backyard or my service or my bus. And I guess it just, it's going to be fascinating how this continues to play out in these future meetings, because ultimately some of these things are going to conflict. You've got the big, broad picture, and some of the numbers that we see here are approaching about the same amount of numbers in responses that we see here. So yes, we have a broader perspective in this sense, but yet you have an also competing large number of folks who are specifically saying we don't want X happening to our service, to our fares. So it's going to be fascinating, how do we balance that, and how do we balance the needs and wants and desires of the general public and our constituents and stakeholders. So I don't really have a question for you, Drew, but just as I get introduced to this process under Trimet, I know some of these things we're launching out are new and innovative for us. But ultimately, it's going to be something that's going to be a little bit challenging, trying to balance all of what's being asked for.
This whole process is really intended to inform leadership and the board. And frankly, as Neil said, it's a funnel. It starts out with that very broad. Here's some ideas. Tell us what you think, and then it gets more refined. And of course, at the beginning, it's at the 10,000-foot level. And when people see our challenges, and as we've described them, they understand that something has to, we have to move the dial. And so they understand that these are some of the choices look practical, all things considered. It's a pick your poison proposition. But when it starts to become more and more refined, to your point, it becomes much more personal. And now it gets more emotional as well. And so, yeah, we'll be wrestling with those challenges as we get further down the line.
Mike, sort of maybe this is a bit of an introduction to the actual proposal itself, is that the specific responses will also give us the information to try to respond to them the best we can while keeping the overall budget intact. And we're attempting to do that and respond to some of those concerns, specifically on the 17th and the 16th and some of those.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to the final agenda item on the day. The refined fare and service proposal. And it looks like a tag team of Neil, Beth, and Janelle.
Yes, and Janelle will be talking a little bit about transit equity, but let me outline where we are with the proposal. Today we do start the next tab on the sheet, which is actually to review the refined plan, the refined proposal, which again I'm pleased to present to you right now. I think it does demonstrate, after hearing this the feedback from the public, that we have listened and attempted to accommodate and deal with many of the concerns that we actually heard from the public. There's a number of things, and perhaps if I could draw your attention to this one pager, which maybe would be the easiest way to walk through this. First message is that our target has been revised to be 12 million. And remember, we started off with the 12 to 17. And it doesn't mean that the high end has gone away, but we will not now, we know that based on delays to the union contract arbitration, that we actually won't have an arbitration take place until mid-May, so we won't know the result during the deliberations for this budget. So I think I'm reading the board well, and certainly reading the community well, I think, in saying that we don't want to take fare increases or service cuts that we don't have to. And so, because we don't know the outcome of that arbitration, we will kick that can down the road, if you will, and wait to see what the outcome of that. And then during the first half of next year, we may need to come back to you with some budget correction actions if it doesn't go our way. So that $5 million at the top end is now not part of this year's budget proposal to you. So that allowed us to look particularly at the $12 million and to really try to make sure that the changes that we're proposing in either fare or service are really as responsive as we can to the public comments that we've heard. So let me go through what those proposals are. Once again, we've remained consistent with the recommendation to have a flat fare priced at $2.50. We've maintained the 2-hour transfers, but we would remove the initial proposal from the initial proposal the notion of limiting round trips with that transfer. So in other words, a round trip, the same transfer policy that is in place today would remain with this proposal. So a person could use a 2-hour transfer for a round trip if necessary. And we would, once again, this is a flat fare, so we're eliminating zones. We'd also create what was a popular outcome in all of the survey results, was to create day pass priced at 2 times one-way ticket. So again, we hope that many of our customers move to the day pass, which would allow them to both have a commute in to work and back home, but also allow the unlimited use of the system during the workday and in the evenings as well. So we think that will be a really good deal for our customers, and we'll hope that more of them transition to that day pass. That total fare package will raise about $6 million, about half of the problem that we have. We also have reduced the number of service cuts, particularly related to bus and rail. The service cuts now are down to a target of about 1.1 million. We still would have some reconfigurations, some changes of routing, and some elimination of bus trips that have very low usage. And so what we have done is gone trip by trip through our system and began to look at where those might be. And so we have a revised proposal regarding that. And I think in particular, there were a couple that we might want to just touch base on real quickly. One is that there was a concern about how we were eliminating the 17 and not replacing the service in the Northwest Industrial area into Clinton and Sauvie Island. And so this revised proposal shows a much more enhanced line 16 that actually provides the service and connections within that area, but still shortens the line 17 to Union Station. So we still believe there's some savings and efficiencies there. We will hear from the community, I'm sure, whether or not that meets the objectives that we're commenting about as we went through this earlier proposal, but we've tried to respond to that. We've also, I think, as we've gone through this, found some very admirable ideas that both our initial feedback from the public seems to like. You might remember one of our proposals was to combine the Line 9 with the Line 70, so the Line 9 that serves Northwest Portland didn't go downtown, and we received a lot of comments on that. And so we'll retain the current routing of Line 9 to serve downtown directly. But one of the notions is to combine Line 70 with the Line 73 of 39th Avenue, which provides a great north-south connection on the east side that I think will open up a number of destinations between southeast Portland and northeast Portland. So there's been some. Similarly, in Washington County, we're combining some lines to provide more continuous service along Cornell, which we also think is a good service improvement for the area, and allows us, well, all of these changes that we're thinking about right now, allow us to have a stronger base from which to build new service and to build a more continuous grid that people can rely on. So just a little bit about that. We could get into more details and questions on that. The recommendation continues to recommend the elimination of the free rail zone. There is some work to do to develop a convention pass program and working with Travel Portland and Multnomah County and other funders of that program to do that. And we would also continue our low-priced pass for downtown circulation for honored citizens and people with disabilities that would essentially $10 for 2 years for unlimited travel in the downtown area. So we would continue and expand that program. In terms of additional contributions to the problem here, reducing the contribution to the Portland streetcar, I might note that that's in addition to, we're actually still increasing the actual subsidy for the Portland streetcar over the next year as the new East Side Loop opens. And so this is just less of an increase to the Portland streetcar than we would have otherwise. The total value of the streetcar contribution will still go up by about $900,000 this year, close to $1 million. We've continuing to talk to the Committee on Accessible Transportation about changing lift boundaries, and this would align the boundaries to what fixed route service is. So, for example, if an geographic area doesn't receive bus service on Saturday, the parallel reduction in service would occur on Lyft. Right now, we offer one map, which if anybody ever gets service at any time of day, any day of the week, we are ubiquitous then in terms of our provision of Lyft service. So this would tailor this more. And this is a step more toward what actual ADA minimums are. It's still above ADA minimums, but a step in that direction. Ads, as Drew noted, was very popular. We just hope there's a market for that. I'm glad it's not a huge number. And as I talk to people in the newspaper industry, there's a lot of joking about the ad business. And nonetheless, we think there is some opportunity. And we actually think there's some creative opportunities already doing this related to our electronic communication with our customers, which is growing every day. We've also increased the target for internal Trimet efficiencies. It included 8 layoffs, which are actually occurring as we speak. There has also been a husbanding of additional positions so that we actually have about 13 positions down on the administrative staff. There will be a concomitant reinvestment of about 6 positions into what I consider some business critical functions, including, for example, an accountant to do a better job of our cash accounting and some other HR information systems that are really critical to the business systems of the agency. And so a little bit of reinvestment in that, so a bit of a realignment of some of our administrative resources as part of this proposal as well. And there are other internal efficiencies associated with that, including some of the things that we'll be paying closer attention to. All in all, so the service reductions or program reductions contributed about half of it, at about $6 million as well, totaling to $10 million, or excuse me, $12 million. And I would just note that, again, we'll have these issues, depending on the additional issues, depending on the outcome of labor arbitration. I would note that $5 million of this problem that we're dealing with this year, with $12 million, is really due to our situation with labor as well. So that's the base case. And I would come back and tell you once again that, if there is fundamental financial threat to it, it's an inability to get hold of the labor costs associated with benefits. And again, that is, I think, got to be really on the top of everybody's agenda in terms of a financial future for Trimet. So just would note that. And perhaps pause for questions. What I wanted Beth to do is to go through some of the other moving parts of the agenda, and as we look forward, particularly in payroll tax and federal subventions and other things, her outlook on all of that. But perhaps
Any questions on how the general overview and what your recommendations are?
Could we, in our initial proposal, we had detail on bus reduction savings by line, some weekend service. Could we receive that before?
Yes.
Is that in the packet here?
Yeah, I think you have this piece somewhere on here that's good. That's all the details.
Thank you. Thank you. And then, to what degree do you feel the discussions with the city and the county are speculative? I know the mayor continues, as you said, the other day to push for full funding of the student passes. And all staff and you are gifted at that kind of communication, to what degree the board might be able to participate in any kind of communication with either the mayor, the city council, or the Multnomah County Commission to help in terms of conversation.
Absolutely. We'll, this is, again, moving our budget process forward. I think it gives us a baseline to begin and have those conversations, but we are progressing in that direction. I appreciate that. I'm definitely
And then the fare collection, I think, we have an opportunity to continue to demonstrate not only recovery, those improvements in behavior, as they are subliminal, whatever we can do, possibly on the website to show that fare collection progress, including what you might even post as citations and collections.
We'd be happy to do that. We do monitor that very closely, so we can easily put that out. And again, I have a note that the actual detailed budget will be presented to you at the briefing next month, and we'll have more conversation about some of those priorities. We might address those within the available resources we have.
I just have a question just for, I know this year's budget around the student pass. So we're funding that through the year for those, for all students.
Yes,
And
through this school year.
This school year. Just for, yes, thanks for that correction. So I know that this is something that is a part of advocacy with students and communities around that. So it would be great to hear, again, a little bit more, because I know it'll come back up just in terms of the specifics.
We'll perhaps put that on our briefing for next month, where we can talk about that in relation to the board.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to spend a few minutes and open for questions on the underlying assumptions of the budget, because there's a lot of public discussion about what we're assuming. The biggest underlying assumption in the budget is the growth of payroll tax, which is of course related to growth of the economy. And so where we are now is where we have been since we started this process, which is assuming a growth rate of 3.5% of the underlying payroll tax. So not the tax goes up every year. This is, we measure the underlying, because it makes it an easier thing to compare year to year. So this year, to put that in context, for fiscal year 12, we're assuming a 4% growth rate. And our year-to-date, we are doing better. We're above budget on our payroll tax collections, about 2.5% better than budget. So the question is, should we be assuming a higher growth rate next year? It's a very legitimate question. And we are watching that very carefully. But where we are for the proposed budget is sticking with the 3.5% for the following reasons. What we'll see in the financial reports this month is we're actually under budget on collections in the most recent period. So it was growing fast at the beginning of the fiscal year. We're under budget now. Why? I'm not sure. The state is seeing that. Nationally, there's some indications of that. California just had a really bad quarter, and their numbers are much bigger than ours, but $6.5 billion less than they expected. So we don't want to make any decisions on being too optimistic yet, but it is definitely on the table. The Fed just came out with a report yesterday which said the economy is growing better, unemployment is down, employment's up, but we're staying the course for now. The quote was, the downside risks are significant. So it's certainly out there, but what you'll see in the proposed budget will have 3.5% growth rate in it.
And that will be, the whole budget can be changed, as you'll see. We will be asked to approve the proposed budget for us to submit to the TSCC, the Multnomah County Tax Supervising Commission, Conservation Commission. But that doesn't mean it's the final budget. So just want to make sure you're comfortable with the underlying assumptions there. The other big assumption is federal receipts, and we are continuing to assume $4 million less than this current fiscal year. You heard Olivia's report on that. The Senate looks good. The House is in complete disarray, and what they have come up with in the past looks really bad. So what the compromise position is, we don't know. If it turns out that the Senate comes out with a bill that we, any news on that, Olivia? I mean, if that's good, that doesn't, it's not the end of the story, because we don't have a bill yet. But we are watching that, and would love to be more optimistic on it, but again, we're holding the $4 million for now. And I guess just a word about our assumptions, in that we have every incentive to be realistic in our assumptions. The idea that we can assume a bigger growth rate and solve the budget hole is really a false hope, because if we assume a high growth rate and we're wrong, we then have much more painful cuts and much deeper cuts halfway through the year, because we have to balance the budget. And likewise, we have no incentive to cut more than we can now. So we are trying very hard to be realistic on this. And I'll, in my monthly report this month to the board financial report, I'll spend more time on some of the details behind this. And but happy to answer any questions about that now. And there are lots of other assumptions in the budget as well, like diesel prices, which we're trying to be realistic about.
Steve?
Let's talk from a policy perspective. You folks manage operations and money. Could we understand what increments mean? What does 3.5 versus 4 versus 5 versus 6?
1% is roughly $2 million. Yeah, very roughly.
So when we get to it, eventually we presumably will have other decisions in the future, and knowing how next year plays out over time, we indicate policy decisions around 1% or 0.5% may result in this.
Right, and it's a very dynamic process. It's not we look at data and make decisions.
In every part of this process, we've got to make assumptions.
Right.
I mean, as we look at that 3.5 to 4% perspective, you know, that's an assumption, either up or down.
Okay.
You know, everybody will have their opinion, but also as we look at the refined fares and proposals and changes and adjustments, there are assumptions there. I mean,
Absolutely.
significant levels
Yes,
of
I'm
assumptions.
emphasizing 3 lines
Yeah,
of a
correct,
1,000-line budget.
of many things that are very dynamic.
Yes.
So, you know, so if we may be a little more conservative here, but in the background, you know, we're proposing a $6 million, you know, increase in our ability to bring revenue in the organization by a fare increase. That's a significant number that we're also making some assumptions on, that we're saying, well, this percentage of people will purchase the full day fare, this percentage of people. And so, you know, as we look at this, there are a lot of moving parts. And this is only one small piece of that essentially, you know, we do have to be a little more on the conservative side, because who knows what everything else is going to look like.
You're out. And it is sort of a disservice to talk about the budget, highlight 3 assumptions. There are many, I mean, what's inflation for parts going to be?
Mhm.
You know, diesel fuel's an easy one to think about, but many assumptions, which, I mean, any business has that type of uncertainty. So we focus on these because they're the big ones, but there are many, which is why we have small variances every month. So we're pretty good on our budget overall.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions? I guess I just use the word realistic. I mean,
Yes.
I think what you're trying to do, and I appreciate that very much, is you're trying to get the revenues, the resources you're going to have based on your best guesstimate of where we are, not over or under. I mean, I think where you are sounds very sound, and I look forward to seeing how these change over the next couple of months as we move forward in the adoption process. But I think where you've got as a starting point is very, very good.
If you'd like, we can certainly move on to the next part of the agenda, and I'd ask John Abel to join us. It's a pleasure. I don't know that Jonelle has spent a lot of time with the board. He's a little bit new to us. I guess that's not fair to say right now, but he has joined us of late as our Director of Diversity and Transparency, and we're very pleased to have him part of the team.
Thank you. And you'll notice that this slide right here, this is always a better process when it's electronic, but we'll do the best we can as I'll walk you through this. Good morning, President Warner, members of the board. As the general manager pointed out, my name is John O'Bell, and I'm the new director of diversity and transit equity here at Trimet. Today I have the great opportunity of giving you sort of a quick overview of Title VI and transit equity and how the agency takes a look at these concepts while making these budgetary decisions. So the big question is, what is Title VI? And you'll notice on page number 3, the best way of describing Title VI is to pull it directly from the statute, which states, no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So there are really 3 concepts to bear in mind when thinking about Title VI transit equity. The first is Title VI, which I just highlighted a second ago, is a federal law that prohibits the discrimination, but it also allows for persons to file administrative complaints. The second is environmental justice, which derives from a presidential executive order and directs federal agencies to identify and address adverse human health or environmental effects on minority and low-income populations. And lastly, we talk about transit equity, and really transit equity refers to the distribution of resources and opportunities through policies that promote the equitable distribution of burdens and benefits, policies that promote equal access to contracting opportunities and jobs, and as you all chatted about earlier, engaging transit-dependent populations in groups that are often disengaged with government processes. The way I like to think about this, and us being a transit agency, is think about this in these terms. The vehicle is really Title VI and environmental justice. The destination is transit equity. It's what we all aspire for. It's the goal. On slide number 5, how do Trimet implement transit equity? That's a question that I get quite often, and one that over time will continue to define and answer. But real briefly, it means that Trimet evaluates fare changes and major service change impacts on minority and low-income populations. For service changes, this means we're taking a look at an equity analysis anytime we're adding or discontinuing or rerouting a line. It means that anytime we're changing the frequency or span of service. And for fare changes, it's any change in fare regardless of the amount of the increase or decrease. Trimet complies with a number of federal guidelines relating to both environmental justice and Title VI. On slide 6, you'll notice a few of the guidelines that we as an agency are required to comply with. Slide 7, as I mentioned earlier, fare and service equity analysis. When we conduct these analyses, we submit them to FTA. I am in frequent, and we as an agency are in frequent conversation and contact with FTA along this process. So in the course of conducting equity analyses, we've learned a few things, and quite frankly, I think to no surprise to anyone in this room, but I think it's worth noting again, as a region, things have changed quite a lot. Page 8. In 1980, Portland's per capita median income was the lowest in the region. Compared to Portland, Gresham was 13% higher, and Hillsborough was 15% higher. Fast forward into the future, the 2009 census reports that Portland's per capita median income is now one of the highest in the region. Compared to Portland, Gresham is now 26 below Portland, and Hillsborough is 14% below Portland. Portland's median income. You see that has shifted remarkably. Page 9. As a region, we've also become more diverse and in many areas quite gentrified. I want to just point out a couple of things here, and I'll be sure to forward you all this PowerPoint because it really does illustrate it when you're at a computer screen, having the ability to see how the slides transpose one another. But the red line is the perimeter for the Trimet Service District, and the color shades denotes the level of density for persons of color. So in the next couple of slides, I'd like to just point you to a few areas. Take a look at East Multnomah County, West Washington County, and take a look at North and Northeast Portland. So this first slide on page number 9 looks at the 1990 minority population density. On page 10, takes a look at the 2000 minority population density. Just let you sit there for a second. And then page 11 is 2010 minority population density. You'll notice how demographics have both regionally expanded, but in some instances, as Dr. Bethel pointed out earlier, have gentrified. Page 12 is a snapshot of the service district's poverty, regional poverty levels. Same idea, except for this time, the color denotes density levels of poverty. You'll notice certain areas are higher than others, but as a district, we, like many other jurisdictions, are facing this growing number of poverty levels. Just as a side note, I think it was in the Oregonian yesterday that more than 800,000 people have applied for a federal food aid assistance, the highest the state has ever experienced, and we certainly see that also in terms of folks who are needing more of our services. Page 13, and let me know if I'm going too fast here. Feel free to let me know. But page 13 takes a look at our distribution of what's referred to as limited English proficiency persons. And no surprise again, we as a region are becoming more diverse in several ways, and one of which is languages spoken. One of the things that we noted when we put together the ERCO Community Roundtable is in many respects it was almost like attending a United Nations meeting. We had over 7 different interpreters, over several different languages spoken. And for many folks, I think this is an important thing for us, is for many folks it was their first interaction with government. Because in many of these respective countries, government is not necessarily a place you want to engage in. So for a lot of folks it was reinforcing what real democracy looks like. Page 14. So what do we know about minority riders? And again, this is a snapshot. They're roughly about 25% of Trimet's riders. We know that they purchase single fare rides more than others, 55% minority versus 48% non-minority. They make more transfers. 36% of trips involve transfers for minority populations versus 28% non-minorities. And more minority riders are transit dependent. 52% minority are transit dependents versus the 39% of the non-minority. The last slide is, what are our next steps? We're going to refine the equity analysis for the updated fare and service proposal that was presented to you today. I'll be back to present those results to this board. We're going to continue in the long term to collaborate with our regional partners. We've had a number of conversations with Metro as well as our other jurisdictional partners to really figure out how as a region do we define a number of these key terms. How do we define transit dependency? How do we define transit equity? It's important that we're all looking at apples to apples and oranges to oranges. We also know that we need to learn more about transit dependent populations. So we're going to be working with a number of institutions to identify strategies of broadening the research and resources we have in terms of those populations. In the short term, we're going to be creating a Transit Equity Advisory Group. The General Manager has charged me to create this group to advise the agency on these decisions in the future. So with that, I look forward to answering any questions you might have. If I don't have them, we'll make sure that we get them answered sometime. Thank you.
Those were some questions. Brett, anything?
I was going to say, Janelle actually presented an earlier version of this to the Budget Task Force that I was on. I had a chance to look at it, it's excellent data, and it really did help the Budget Task Force as we were going through exactly our initial recommendation. It's stunning when you look at the amount of change this region has undergone. And in our daily lives, we don't notice it, quite honestly. And so I think it's good to get this kind of information. So thank you, John.
I have no questions, but I do want to commend the report. It's good to see what you see in writing. That is actually has happened. As I mentioned to you earlier, Northeast gentrification is killing us. It has killed us. And I mean that community, it has changed in such a way. Many persons being forced out to the numbers, and less transportation coming in. And many of them have to come in, go into the neighborhood, come back out, go to work, and repeat that all over again in order to get to what we used to call up in the New England area a bedroom town, just a place that you sleep because you don't have time to do anything else out there. So this is good when we have this numbers before us. And I hope that then, as we are continuing to do the budgeting and the routes and all of that we will keep this in mind. That while we cannot cater exclusively to those that are impacted by this, more than we can cater exclusively to those who are needing paratransit or disability. But we must make sure we try to do and become as balanced as we can, and we're serving everyone with less and less disparity.
For those of you who don't know, you use the term those living in the numbers. I don't know what the number is at 82nd now. East is the numbers, or is there a definition? I've never really understood that, but essentially it's East County.
It's East County.
East County is what we're talking about when that term gets used. Yeah. See?
For those of us who grew up here, and you know, it has really changed. I grew up in North Portland, 2 blocks from Jefferson High School, and saw it change over time before going on to university, and then helping my mother move to an assisted living center in the late 70s. So we've seen the communities change. We look at what's occurring in Western Washington County, or the 5 years I spent in East Multnomah County. Dramatic changes has occurred. This is a great presentation. It would help for us to describe and define a few things, I think. One is, as we progress, is minority a person of color? Because looking at the chart, which is a dramatic and scary chart on 12, poverty doesn't recognize color, and poverty is spread throughout our region, and prosperity is becoming further removed from many people. Serving on impact among many members of the elected community in the region, I have people resist saying there's a relationship between where someone works, where they live, and how they move transportation, whether by car or transit. It's the jobs housing issue. Some elected officials have said that's a false argument. Well, it's increasingly becoming an important argument, because where you can afford to live and where you are required to work are increasingly